The air in College Park, Orlando, on the morning of April 10th was thick with the usual Florida humidity, the kind of quiet stillness that makes a suburban neighborhood feel like a sanctuary. This is an area of manicured lawns, brick-lined streets, and a sense of safety that residents pay a premium to maintain. For one woman, this was the backdrop of her daily discipline, a pre-dawn run through the familiar turns of her community. But at 4:28 a.m., the sanctuary vanished. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. As she jogged northbound in front of 1800 North Northumberland Avenue, a figure emerged from the darkness. There was no verbal warning, no demand for money, and no preamble. The attacker used a clothesline maneuver, striking her across the neck and chest with his forearm with enough velocity to lift her off her feet and slam her onto the asphalt. The impact was deafening in the silence of the morning. The victim, gasping for air and stunned by the sudden violence, found herself pinned to the ground. The suspect, later identified as 21-year-old Tyler Fate, moved to mount her. He lunged toward her with his hands and knees, his intentions clear to the woman fighting for her life beneath him. She began to kick frantically, her sneakers striking at his chest and legs, her screams piercing the air of the sleeping neighborhood. In most true crime stories, this is the moment the attacker panics and flees. But what the victim saw next was far more disturbing. As she screamed and fought, Fate didn't look afraid. He didn't look like a man worried about being caught. Instead, he looked down at her and smiled. It was a look of chilling satisfaction that suggested the terror he was causing was precisely the outcome he desired. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. Finally, perhaps realizing that the volume of her screams would soon draw neighbors to their windows, Fate stood up and walked away. He didn't run at first. He simply retreated eastward toward West New Hampshire Street. The victim, despite her injuries, scrapes on her elbows and a lacerated lip, managed to get to her feet and run in the opposite direction, her heart hammering against her ribs. When the Orlando police arrived, they didn't have to look far for evidence. The neighborhood was covered in Nest and Ring cameras. One specific video from 1800 North Northumberland captured the entire incident. The white male in a pale blue hoodie running behind a white Lexus SUV, the sound of the victim's screams echoing for several agonizing seconds, and the suspect's retreat. But as the sun began to rise over Orlando, a startling realization set in for the investigators. The man they were looking for wasn't a drifter or a stranger passing through. Based on the direction he ran, it appeared the predator might actually be a neighbor. The search was on, but what the police would find a few hours later, napping in the grass, was only the beginning of a legal nightmare that would leave an entire city feeling betrayed. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. By 8:45 a.m., less than 5 hours after the attack on Northumberland Avenue, Orange County sheriffs spotted a man matching the victim's description. He was found near the intersection of Illinois Avenue and Miller Avenue. He wasn't hiding in a basement or fleeing the state. Tyler Fate was found napping in a grassy area, still wearing the pale blue hoodie and dark pants described by the jogger. When detectives brought him in for questioning, Fate's defense was nonsensical. He claimed he hadn't even been in his neighborhood that morning, despite living only 2 houses away from the crime scene. He told police he was in Winter Park. When officers pointed out that his right forearm appeared swollen and painful, consistent with the clotheslining move described by the victim, Fate claimed his arm hurt because someone must have stomped on it while he was sleeping in the grass. As the Orlando Police Department dug into Fate's background, a terrifying pattern emerged. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment or a sudden break from reality. Fate had a documented history of targeting women in public spaces. Just months earlier, in early 2024, he had been found guilty of battery in an incident at a Hobby Lobby. In that case, he had approached a female stranger and touched her without consent, a precursor to the physical violence unleashed on the jogger. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. Even more alarming was an incident from 2022 at the Orlando International Airport. Fate had been arrested for armed trespassing and aggravated assault after brandishing a knife. Each time the legal system touched Tyler Fate, he was processed, released, and allowed to return to the streets. The charges for the April 10th attack were severe: attempted sexual battery and battery. The attempted sexual battery charge was based on his attempt to mount the victim while she was pinned to the ground. For the residents of College Park, there was a brief moment of relief. A violent predator with a history of escalating behavior was finally behind bars. However, behind the scenes at the state attorney's office, the case was beginning to crumble. Prosecutors were looking at the evidence through a clinical lens. They noted that Fate hadn't tried to remove the victim's clothing. He hadn't made a verbal sexual demand. Under Florida's strict evidentiary rules, they feared they couldn't prove sexual intent beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury. While the community expected a long prison sentence to end this cycle of violence, a secret negotiation was underway that would result in Fate being back on the same street as his victim in just a matter of months. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. In November, the public learned the details of the sweetheart deal brokered by State Attorney Monique Worrell's office. The attempted sexual battery charge was dropped. In its place, Fate pleaded to a single count of felony battery. The sentence? 225 days in jail, exactly the amount of time he had already served while awaiting trial. He was released on 3 years of probation. The conditions seemed strict on paper: a psychosexual evaluation, a no-contact order with the victim, and a requirement to stay at least 3 blocks away from the incident location. But there was a glaring physical problem. Tyler Fate lived only 2 houses away from where the attack happened. A 3-block radius meant he could essentially step off his front porch and be in violation, yet he was sent right back to his grandmother's home in that very neighborhood. Then came the revelation of a massive administrative error. During the sentencing, a prosecutor accidentally checked a box for withhold of adjudication. In the legal world, this is a monumental mistake. It meant that even though Fate pleaded guilty to a violent felony, he was technically not a convicted felon. This status would have protected his civil rights and kept the strike off his permanent record. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. State Attorney Worrell later explained the math of the failure. In Florida, the justice system uses a score sheet to determine sentences. Because Fate's previous crimes were classified in a way that didn't trigger high points, he only scored an 11. Under state law, a defendant needs 44 points before a judge is mandated to give them prison time. The system saw a man who clotheslined a woman and tried to mount her as an 11-point offender. The fallout was immediate. Neighbors in College Park reported seeing Fate back on the streets within days of his release. He was spotted lunging at people, behaving erratically, and hovering near the areas where residents walked their dogs and children played. The sense of sanctuary was gone, replaced by a no-go zone atmosphere. The victim had signed off on the plea deal, but only under the impression that the system would monitor him. That monitoring, however, relied on one person: Tyler Fate himself. He was required to report to a probation officer and undergo a psychiatric evaluation. But by December, the monitored safety of College Park was about to explode as Fate's own family reached their breaking point. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. The final act of Tyler Fate's freedom began not with a police stakeout, but with a confession from inside his own home. On November 20th, Fate's grandmother contacted his probation officer with a harrowing message. She could no longer house him. She stated she was afraid of him, citing his mental illness and a history of violent tendencies. Fate had moved out without notifying his probation officer, a direct violation of his release. He was now a transient, a high-risk offender with a history of sexual violence, wandering the streets of Orlando with no fixed address. On December 9th, the last safety net snapped when Fate failed to show up for his court-mandated psychosexual evaluation. For 6 days, he was a ghost. Residents in College Park were on high alert, sharing his photo on community apps and locking their doors. Finally, on December 15th, police tracked him down. The body cam footage of his arrest captured a confused Fate asking, "Why am I being arrested?" as he was ordered to sit on the pavement. He had his ID tucked into his sock, a sign of his transient status. State Attorney Monique Worrell held a press conference to address the roar of public anger. She blamed systemic gaps, arguing that the criminal justice system is being used as a substitute for care for the mentally ill and homeless. She argued that the probation deal was actually a mechanism for accountability, because without it, they wouldn't have had the legal grounds to arrest him again so quickly. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. However, the legal experts and the community saw it differently. To them, the mechanism only worked after the safety of the public had already been compromised. If Fate hadn't been arrested on the probation violation, how much longer would it have been before another 4:30 a.m. jogger became a victim? As of today, December 22nd, 2025, Tyler Fate is back in a cell at the Orange County Jail. Today is his arraignment for the probation violations. Because he has now violated the terms of his withhold of adjudication, the judge has the power to formally convict him of the original felony battery, officially labeling him a convicted felon and opening the door for a much harsher prison sentence. The smiling predator is no longer walking the streets of College Park, but the case remains a haunting case study of a legal system that counts points instead of protecting people. The victim's screams on Northumberland Avenue led to an arrest, a plea, and a release. But it was only through her continued bravery and the vigilance of a terrified neighborhood that the cycle was finally halted. And as always, you've been watching True Crime Story Vault, where every case is examined with facts, clarity, and respect for the people affected. If you want to see more fact-based true crime stories like this one, make sure you subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.